My stepsister bullied me my entire life. Now she sued to steal my house I bought with sacrifice. But the judge destroyed her in court, and she never expected what happened next. I'm 25 years old. I work in administration for a logistics company. And honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago still keeps me up at night. My stepsister, well, technically my stepsister, although she never considered me family for even a second, basically tried to steal my house. And when I say tried to steal, I'm not exaggerating. She literally sued me to force me out of my own house so she could move in with her 4 kids. Yes, you read that right. But for you to understand how absurd all of this is, I need to go back like 18 years, when my mom married Heather's dad and my life became hell. I was 7 years old when Mom met Steve, who was Heather's dad. He seemed like a decent guy, honestly, and Mom was happy after being alone for so long, so I was happy for her. Heather was 8 at the time, and I remember perfectly the day we met. It was at a park, like one of those awkward family dates where parents try to get the kids to get along. I was super excited because I always wanted to have an older sister. Like, I had spent months imagining we'd have sleepovers and borrow each other's clothes and all those things sisters do in movies. I walked up to her all smiley with my favorite Barbie because I thought we could play together, and she looked at me with such disgust, like I was offering her garbage, and she told me literally, "I don't want to play with you and I'm never going to be your sister." She was 8 years old and already an expert in cruelty, basically. Mom and Steve got married like 6 months later, and from day one, Heather made it very clear that I wasn't welcome in her life. We all lived together in Steve's house, which was bigger, and she did everything possible to make me feel miserable. If I walked into a room where she was, she'd leave immediately. If I tried to talk to her, she'd ignore me or tell me to shut up. At school, it was worse because she'd tell all her friends that I was a loser and that we weren't real family, just that our parents had gotten married by mistake or something. I remember once, I must have been like 9 at the time, I tried to sit with her and her friends at lunch because I had nowhere else to sit, and she yelled at me in front of everyone to get lost, that nobody wanted me there. I stood there with my tray, feeling like I wanted to die while everyone laughed. Mom tried to talk to her, like she'd say, "Heather, you need to be nicer to Natalie. You're sisters now." But Heather would just respond that I wasn't her sister, and never would be. Steve at first tried to defend me, which I appreciated. But over time, he kind of gave up because Heather would throw huge tantrums every time he tried to force her to interact with me. The thing is that Mom and Steve had 2 kids together when I was like 10 and 11, and I thought maybe that would make Heather accept me more because now we were all official family. But no. She adored the babies, played with them, and took care of them and everything, but with me, she was still the same nightmare as always. When Heather turned 13, she decided she wanted to go live with her biological mom, who lived like 2 hours away from us. Her mom had never been very present in her life. I don't know exactly why, but I think she had drug problems or something. But suddenly, Heather decided she'd rather live with her than in a house with me. Honestly, it was a relief when she left. The house felt calmer. I could breathe without feeling like someone hated me constantly. Mom was sad because she felt she'd failed at making us a united family, but I just felt peace. Steve would visit her often, and sometimes she'd come on weekends, but I basically hid in my room when she was around, and everyone seemed fine with that arrangement. Like 3 years passed without much contact with Heather until she got pregnant at 16. Yeah, 16 years old and pregnant by some guy who left her as soon as he found out. Her mom kicked her out of the house because apparently she couldn't deal with a baby there, so Heather had to move back in with us. I was 15 at the time, and I thought, well, maybe this matured her. Maybe now we can get along. How naive I was. The day she arrived with her pregnant belly, I tried to be nice, like I told her congratulations on the baby and asked if she needed anything. And she looked at me with that contempt she always reserved for me and told me not to talk to her, that she didn't want anything from me. Throughout her entire pregnancy, we lived in the same house, and she acted like I didn't exist, which seemed normal to me at that point by then. When the baby was born, a beautiful girl named Emma, I was at the hospital because Mom insisted the whole family should be there. I saw the baby through the nursery window and I thought she was precious. Obviously. A few days later, when they were already home, I went down to the living room where Heather was with Emma and asked if I could hold her. The look she gave me was pure hatred, like she told me not to even think about getting close to her daughter, that I wasn't her real aunt, and that she didn't want me to touch her baby ever. Mom was there and told her, "Heather, that's ridiculous. Natalie is her aunt." But Heather just grabbed the baby and went to her room and locked the door. During the month she lived with us after having Emma, never, not even once, did she let me get close to that child. About a year later, she got a small apartment with help from the government. I don't know exactly how all that worked, but basically she left again and I felt relieved again. I continued with my life, finished high school, started working, went to college. During those years, Heather had 3 more kids, all with different fathers from what I understood. And basically, I had no contact with her, except when she came to Mom and Steve's house on Christmas or birthdays, and I simply avoided her. She never reached out to me, never tried to build any kind of relationship. And I was perfectly fine with that. I had already accepted that we were never going to be real sisters, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. When I was 23, I managed to save enough money for a down payment on a small house. Nothing fancy, like a 2-bedroom house in a decent but not luxurious neighborhood. But it was mine. I had worked like crazy for years, saving every penny, doing overtime, living with Mom to not pay rent. It was the biggest achievement of my life up to that point. Mom and Steve came to see the house when I moved in, and they were super proud. They helped me with some furniture and everything. Heather never came, never asked about my house, never congratulated me. Perfect. I didn't need her. Fast forward to like 8 months ago. Heather already had 4 kids. The oldest was like 9 and the youngest 2. And apparently things weren't going well for her financially. She lost her job at I don't know what store, and then lost the apartment because she couldn't pay rent. She ended up moving in with Mom and Steve with all 4 kids, and I can imagine the chaos that was. Mom would call me sometimes to tell me how things were going, and she sounded exhausted. Like she'd tell me the house was a disaster with so many kids, and that Heather didn't help much because she was depressed or stressed or whatever. I felt sorry for Mom and Steve, but honestly, I felt nothing for Heather. Zero empathy after how she'd treated me my whole life. One day, Mom called me, and from the tone of her voice, I knew she was going to ask me something I wasn't going to like. She said, "Natalie, I know this is a lot to ask, but Heather needs a place to stay with the kids. The house is too full and she's looking for options. Do you think she could stay with you for a while?" I was quiet for like 10 seconds because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, "Mom, are you kidding? Heather has hated me my whole life. She's never been nice to me for even one day. Why the hell would you think I'd want her living in my house?" Mom started with the speech about how we're family and we have to help each other and that the kids are innocent in all this, but I told her no, that absolutely not. That this was my house that I bought with my money after working super hard, and that Heather wasn't welcome there. Mom sighed and said, "Okay, I understand," and hung up. I felt a little guilty for like 2 seconds, but then I remembered all the years of bullying and rejection, and the guilt flew away. I thought that was the end of it. But 2 days later, I get a call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, it was Heather. We hadn't spoken directly in years. Literal years. She said, "I need to stay at your house with my kids. Not even a hello or, how are you? Just a demand." I told her no. That I'd already talked to Mom and my answer was no. Heather started screaming, like she told me I was selfish, that I had a 2-bedroom house as if that it was a mansion, and that I lived alone. So obviously I had space. I explained that it wasn't about space, that she had never treated me like family and that I didn't owe her anything. That's when she said something that still makes my blood boil. She told me, "Don't be ridiculous. That was years ago. We were kids. Get over it. I need your help now." Can you believe it? 2 years of making me feel like garbage, and she expected me to just get over it because now it was convenient for her. I told her no again, and was about to hang up when she changed tactics and started crying, saying her kids had nowhere to go, that I was her only option, that if I didn't help her, they were going to end up on the street. She tried to make me feel guilty about the kids, and yes, I felt bad for the kids because they're not to blame for anything, but I also knew she had other options, that Mom and Steve had them in their house, that they weren't going to literally end up on the street. I told her I was sorry, but the answer was no, and I hung up. She called me like 20 more times that day, but I didn't answer any of them. What happened next was that Heather started contacting all our extended family, telling them her version of the story. She'd tell them she was desperate, that she was going to end up homeless with 4 small children, and that I had an empty house, but refused to help her because I was a horrible, selfish person. My phone started exploding with messages from uncles, cousins, even my grandma called me to tell me I should help my sister in her time of need. None of them knew, or apparently didn't care about, the full story of how Heather had treated me. I tried to explain, but it was like talking to a wall. Everyone was on Heather's side because she had kids, and that automatically made her the victim. I thought eventually everything would calm down, that Heather would find another place or just stay with Mom and Steve until she could recover. But then, like 3 weeks after that, call. I was at my house on a Saturday afternoon watching Netflix when the doorbell rings. I go to the door and there's Heather with her 4 kids and like 6 suitcases. The kids looked tired and confused. The youngest was crying. Heather smiled at me, like a super obvious fake smile, and told me, "Well, here we are. Thanks for letting us stay." My brain took like 5 seconds to process what was happening. I told her, "Heather, what are you doing? I never said you could stay." She kept smiling and said, "I know you didn't want to at first, but I'm sure you've reconsidered. Besides, we're already here." I couldn't believe the audacity. I told her no, that I wasn't going to let her in, that she had to leave. The kids started looking more scared and the baby was crying louder. Heather changed her tactic and started getting aggressive. She told me I was a heartless bitch, that how could I leave these innocent children without a place to sleep. I told her she was their mother, and that wasn't my responsibility to leave. She grabbed the crying baby and practically put him in my face, saying, "Look at him. Are you going to make my son sleep on the street tonight?" I was shaking with rage and nerves, but I held my ground. I told her Mom and Steve had space for them to go there. She yelled that she couldn't keep staying there, that she needed her own space and that I had to give it to her. At that moment, I knew that if I let her in, even for one night, I'd never be able to get her out. I told her one last time that I wasn't going to let her in, and I closed the door. She started banging on the door and screaming. The kids were crying. It was horrible. I called Mom and told her to come pick up Heather because she was at my door. Mom arrived in like 20 minutes, and there was a huge argument in my driveway where Heather was yelling at Mom that I was a terrible person and that I'd fooled everyone into playing the victim for years. Eventually, Mom managed to convince her to get in the car and they left. That night, I cried from pure frustration and stress, like I couldn't believe my stepsister had tried to basically force her way into my house. I thought after that she'd surely leave me alone. But it turns out Heather had other plans. Like a week later, I receive a certified package at my house. I open it and it's legal papers. Heather was suing me. I'm not joking. She was legally suing me. The lawsuit said something about family housing, an obligation between sisters, and a bunch of legal terms that honestly I didn't fully understand. Basically, Heather was arguing that because we were family and she was in a desperate situation, I had a legal obligation to provide her with housing. It also mentioned that the house had enough space for both families, again with the 2 bedrooms thing, as if that was enough for 6 people, and that I was being maliciously negligent with my nephews. I went into total panic. I had to hire a lawyer, which cost me money I hadn't planned to spend, and start preparing to go to court. My lawyer, who was an older super professional guy, told me from the beginning that Heather's case was ridiculous and had no legal basis, that nobody can force you to give your house to someone just because they're family. But I still had to go to court and defend myself officially. During that time, Heather kept contacting extended family, now telling them she was suing me because I refused to fulfill my family obligations. Half the family stopped talking to me, blocked me on social media and everything. My grandma called me crying, saying she couldn't believe things had gotten this far. The day of the hearing was surreal. We were in a small courtroom, not like the ones you see in movies. Heather was there with her lawyer, who seemed so convinced they had a solid case, like confident, and everything. My lawyer presented all the evidence that the house was mine, that I had bought it with my money, that there was no legal obligation to provide housing to adult family members capable of working. When it was Heather's turn to speak, she started with a super dramatic speech about how I had always hated her. Since we were kids, the irony was incredible, that she only wanted the best for her children, that I had the resources and she didn't. She lied about several things too, like she said Mom had helped me buy the house. She didn't. I bought it alone. And that therefore it was partially family patrimony. The judge, an older woman who seemed fed up with everything, listened to both sides and then basically told Heather that her case made no sense. She used legal words, obviously, but basically explained to her that being sisters, even if they were full-blood sisters who got along well, didn't create any legal obligation to share private property. She told her she understood she was in a difficult situation, but that didn't give her rights to another person's property. She dismissed the case on the spot. Heather started, crying right there in court. Her lawyer looked uncomfortable and embarrassed. I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Like I had won, but the whole process had been so stressful and absurd that I couldn't even really celebrate. We left the courthouse and Heather looked at me with such hatred. She told me I was the worst person she'd ever met, that I had destroyed her family, that her kids were going to suffer because of me. I told her that her kids were suffering because of her decisions, not mine, and I left. I haven't heard from her since that day. It's been like 6 months. Mom tells me that Heather finally found a smaller apartment with help from social services and that she's working at a supermarket. The kids are fine, apparently. Mom has also told me she regrets having asked me to help Heather, that she understands why I said no and that she shouldn't have put me in that position. Extended family is still divided. Some finally understood my side of the story when they found out. Heather had sued me because that seemed like too much even to them, but others still think I'm selfish and that I should have helped regardless of the past. My grandma doesn't talk to me anymore. Some cousins blocked me permanently. And you know what? It hurts to lose those relationships, but I also realize that if those people are willing to judge me without knowing the whole story, then maybe they're not relationships worth keeping. I still think about all this more often than I'd like. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, if I should have been the bigger person and helped despite everything. But then I remember all those years of rejection and cruelty. I remember how Heather never considered me family until it was convenient for her. I remember that she literally tried to steal my house, and I know I made the right decision. I worked too hard for that house to let someone who treated me like garbage for years take it from me just because now she had problems. Last week, I was organizing some documents and found the lawsuit papers. I read them again, and it still seems incredible to me that all that happened. Part of me feels bad for Heather's kids because they're not to blame for any of this. But I also know that I wasn't their salvation, that it wasn't my responsibility to sacrifice my stability for them. I'm still living in my house, still working, still living my life. And that's okay, I guess.